everybody, this is Dr. L, and I'm going to talk to you today about some cell structures. Specifically, we're going to begin by focusing on membranes, and then there'll be some follow-up videos that address cell walls. First, some cell fundamentals. So, as you should know by now, there are two basic cell types found in the domains of living things. Those two cell types are eukaryotic and prokaryotic. Here are some diagrams of there's a diagram of a prokaryotic cell, and below that is an electron micrograph, which is a real image of a prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic cells lack a nucleus. Instead, they have one or sometimes two chromosomes wrapped up in an area called the nucleoid, and it's shown here in red. They have ribosomes, which are responsible for protein synthesis, and they're found distributed through the cytoplasm or cell fluid. They can have extra chromosomal pieces of DNA, genetic information, called plasmids, and they have a cell membrane or cytoplasmic membrane that bounds the cell, and outside of that, in yellow here, is the cell wall. They can also have flagella, one, two, or many, not just located at the pole, but sometimes distributed all around the cell. These are protein-based appendages that help prokaryotic cells locomote or move around. And they can have additional elements outside on the cell envelope that are not covered here and that I won't get into at this point in time. All prokaryotic cells are microbial, and the organisms that belong to the domains bacteria and archaea both have prokaryotic cell types. All of the organisms found in the domain eukarya have eukaryotic cell structure. Here we see an animal cell structure, and I know that because there is no cell wall. Only the animals lack cell walls in the domain eukarya. So the plants, the fungi, the algae, the protozoa, they all have cell walls. And that's how I know this is an animal cell. Eukaryotic cells use they extensively use membranes to build organelles, which are subcellular structures. For example, a mitochondrion shown here. Eukaryotic cells also have all of their genomic DNA, their nuclear genomic DNA within a nucleus, and that's in here, and it's bounded by this purple membrane system, and the membrane is a double membrane. So we have an inner membrane, and then we have the outer membrane, and it radiates out in a structure called the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum can be further divided into rough endoplasmic reticulum, RER, which contains ribosomes. There's a little orange dot studded through here, and smooth endoplasmic reticulum, which lacks ribosomes. And they're called rough versus smooth because of how they look when you look at them microscopically. So we're focusing on membrane structure today, and eukaryotes have a lot of membrane structure. All cells have some basic building blocks common to all cells, and that is that they all have cytoplasmic membranes, membranes that bound the cells. They all have ribosomes, which make proteins. They all have a chromosome or chromosomes, which is DNA that contains genetic information. They all have the jelly-like water-based fluid called cytoplasm, which fills up the cell and in which much of the cell's biochemistry occurs. Only some cells have cell walls, and only eukaryotic cells have more complex internal structures referred to as organelles. All cells have cell structures that help them achieve particular functions. For example, the ribosomes are necessary in order to make protein. We're going to focus next on cell membranes. So here is a structure or a cartoon depicting a cytoplasmic membrane, and it's colored here in red and orange or gold are the little individual molecules that are known as phospholipids, and I'll be explaining that chemistry to you in a moment. The phospholipids orient themselves by packing together into two layers. This is called a bilayer. Here's the top layer, and underneath is the bottom layer, almost like two slices of bread in a sandwich. Okay, and the phospholipids will always orient this way, creating the cell membrane, creating any membrane found in a cell, but also just like the cell cytoplasmic membrane, the name for the membrane that bounds the cell. Membranes are made largely of phospholipids, which fall into the lipid category of macromolecule, but they're also rich in proteins. So these blue blobs here are proteins, and this purple is a protein as well. They contain an additional form of lipid that is called cholesterol, at least in the case of animal cells. So these are sterol components. They're a type of lipid, sterol or steroids, and they are responsible for giving some rigidity or additional structure or stiffness to the membrane. The membrane itself is quite fluid, so these phospholipids don't just stay in one spot. This phospholipid, might move like from this corner here, the front left corner, all the way over to the back corner. It's like, they're constantly in motion. They may even flip from one side to the other from time to time. So it's a fluid structure, very fluid. There are hydrophobic or water not loving regions, and there are hydrophilic regions. And the hydrophilic regions will point to the outside and to the inside. The inside of the cell is watery. The outside of the cell will also have to be watery for all cells. Additional macromolecules that you can see here are these chains of carbohydrates poking up, and on the outsides of cells they largely serve as indicators to identify what a cell is, often called antigens. Here we have a carbohydrate attached to a protein. That would be called a glycoprotein, that structure. Here we have a protein that spans the membrane, and it has a channel running through it. A lot of the membrane proteins are there to transport substances from the outside to the inside, or from the inside to the outside, depending on what it is. Proteins and membranes may also serve the role of catalyzing enzymatic reactions, doing the biochemistry that lets cells make energy and do their cellular work. So those proteins play a role in cell-cell recognition or identity, in metabolism, and in transport. They do all of those things, the proteins that are found in cell membranes. Ultimately, the function of a plasma membrane or a cell membrane is to serve as a selectively permeable, did you get those words? Selectively permeable barrier that bounds the cell. That's like the major function of a cell's cytoplasmic membrane. So because these things are mobile, they allow some chemicals to cross them, but not, which is what it means to be permeable, right? That means to be porous or allow things across, not a complete barrier. The selectively adjective means that the membrane will control what can go across and what cannot go across. And we'll talk more about that in other locations. Okay, so this is a phospholipid, and in the next video segment I will explain some of the chemistry of phospholipids. Phospholipids make up the majority of, or at least 50% and a little bit more, of the chemistry inside each cell membrane, including the cytoplasmic membrane. So here we've got this ball part here and these two tails, and that's what we were looking at in this previous figure here, this little ball and these tails. The ball is the phosphate head, the tails are called the fatty acid tails, and we're going to talk about that chemistry in the next video.